This is Benji Garcia, President of POWERinU Training and Coaching Philippines. Welcome to POWERinu's complimentary webinar, Post-COVID-19 ECQ, Leading People in Times of Volatility, Uncertainty, Complexity, and Ambiguity. Let me now introduce our speaker. Ms. Thelma Meneses is a senior human resource professional with over 30 years of executive experience in global, regional, and country roles. Thelma is currently with Elana Cosmetics as the human resource head, but prior to that, she has worked with a number of well-known organizations such as Coca-Cola, Eastman Kodak, Mead Johnson Nutritionals, Unilever, and AstraZeneca. She also worked at a number of local companies in the retail, hospitality and gaming, electrical, and food manufacturing industries. Thelma thrives in leading businesses in times of uncertainty and ambiguity. She has led several organizational transformation initiatives throughout her career. Hence, she is very familiar with the challenges of leading an organization amidst crisis. Thelma is also a former colleague and a friend, and I'm happy that she accepted our invitation to speak at our webinar today. Let me now call on our speaker, Ms. Thelma Meneses.
Good evening, everyone. And I'm happy to share some of my insights to everyone who's in this webinar session. And it's a privilege and a pleasure to be part of the role that POWERinU is starting to create within the HR community and the business community as well, to make sure that we also help in business building and even perhaps nation building. So the fact that we are doing this for free is really what POWERinU represents. This is not just about creating wealth. It's also about making sure that the human capital in the country and even outside Philippines is taken care of in our own small way. So I am very happy to be part of this in my own small way. So thank you very much, Benji, and the rest of the leadership team of POWERinU. Let me start with what I'd like to share with you. So you probably have heard about VUCA. It's the 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 phrase now. It's the flavor of the year. A lot of people are talking about VUCA. It's volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. The world has already started looking at businesses with so much VUCA around. In the manufacturing sector, we are already in the Industrial Revolution 4.0, from the time that manufacturing or commerce started from the horsepower and then followed by the engine, and then on the Industrial Revolution 3.0, we started embracing technology. We started embracing, computers and all that. And now we're starting to look at AI, artificial intelligence. There's now a blur on the physical and the physical aspects of how we do business, not just in the manufacturing sector, but also in other areas. So we started looking at 3G, capabilities and all that. So there's a lot of, so we also heard about disruptive innovation, where everything is starting to change in the way we look at things, in the way we do business. And so these are the disruptions that we need to start, looking at. And how we see the world needs to be redefined, and how we look at businesses need to also be to be reviewed thoroughly, especially that running a business definitely would need to have a strong competitive advantage, and that's the best competitive advantage of any business is about talent. So this is really what we're going to talk about tonight. Okay. So I'm going to talk about what's happening about COVID. Where to COVID? What's the impact on the global economy? So I'll just be very brief on this one because I am sure you've heard about it already. So I'm going to spend more time on the second one, how we do what we do after ECQ, and how to reopen our workplace after ECQ. So I'd like to call out those attendees who are not from the Philippines, that most of the examples I will be doing or I will be giving are very Philippine centric, because it's just recently that the government has made an announcement that, different parts of the country would now be either on, you know, the first lockdown uh, is going to be lifted. The ECQ is going to be lifted, but there are different constraints in some areas where COVID is still not, going into the low peak. So we'll figure out how the other non-Philippine centric businesses can learn from us, and then we move forward. So as you know, um, coronavirus highlights the need to transform traditional supply chain models. If you look at COVID, the real impact of COVID started with, or how we go about COVID and how do we get out of this pandemic issues as a result of the COVID, is the ability of China to recover from from this pandemic issue. Why are we dependent on China? The global economy is really very highly dependent on the import and exports of most of its products from China. So the different economies will be impacted, especially the European business, the US, because they're also highly dependent on the manufacturing products of China, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and Vietnam. Some countries who have absolute advantage and are not highly reliant on the businesses with China may not will of course will not really have that great impact in terms of economy, but because there's a global supply chain that drives how we support each other from a global economy, then according to the Deloitte Consulting Group, there's still going to be a slowdown in our economy. So even capital market stocks and all that, you may have already seen the emergence of stock market falls, and so the economy is really going to be impacted because of this COVID pandemic issues, and there are um, forecasts that are highly um, aggressive, and they say that by second quarter of next year we will be able to recover, as opposed to some forecast where they say we can probably recover by the fourth quarter of this year. So what does that tell us? It tells us that it is really uncertain. It really depends on how we manage the pandemic issues, and how each of our businesses, or how the different industries can recover and reinvent themselves during this pandemic phenomenon. Okay, so which companies will mitigate the impact from COVID? I look at these companies into four areas. Companies who would have a medium risk of being able to mitigate COVID are those companies who have already developed and implemented supply chain risk management and business continuity strategies. They have diversified supply chains from a geographic perspective, so that they don't have high risk from any one country or region that may not necessarily be ready to bounce back even after ECQ has been lifted. They have multi-source suppliers, or they're not just limited to a one supplier that would allow them to have high risk if this supplier bellies up. Inventory strategy is something that these companies have to buffer against supply chain disruption. So think about your company where, and assess your company whether or not in your organization you have this. So do you have medium risk of bellying up, so to speak? And you're highly likely to recover from COVID-19 adverse consequences. On the other hand, there are companies who are overly reliant on a single geography or a single supplier for their key products. They don't have enough visibility across the extended supply network to see their risks. They don't have the systems to understand their inventory status, to project stockouts of direct materials, optimize production, or finished goods to optimize customer allocation. They don't have flexible logistics networks to ensure the flow of goods in a profitable manner. So most of these are really coming from startup companies where supply chain is really not in that mature level. So they are highly likely to be impacted adversely by the impact of COVID-19. Okay. Now, those companies who have already built strong relationships with key suppliers, they have already put systems in place to provide visibility across their extended supply network. They have developed the agility within their production and distribution networks, whether this is within or outsourced. They can quickly reconfigure and maintain their supply. They have invested in the capability around supply chain planning and control tower solutions. These are the companies who are better equipped and better prepared to address whatever the adverse consequences of COVID. Of course, we have to start looking also at, companies, they have strong legacy but what's going to hurt them most is really if they cannot quickly adapt and change in the new environment because of their strong advocacy to whatever they have already. So bottom line is that even if these companies have strong legacy supply chain capabilities, if they're not open to change and reconfigure how best they can, embrace this, then and how best they can reach, extend consumer reach and all that, then they're also likely to go down, or likely not to be able to manage the adverse impact of COVID. How do we do what we do? How we do what we do after ECQ? Healthcare professionals, those who really know what pandemic is because they have seen this in the MERS phenomenon, the SARS, even the Ebola. They know that any pandemic issue could last many months even after ECQ is lifted, especially the coronavirus. We don't have yet the vaccine and all that. So when looking at this pandemic or the COVID, we have to take a look at, the peaks followed by the periods of reduced illnesses. So there would be peaks and there would be, so it's like a curve, it's like a bell curve. So these two would create two resulting consequences, both on our people and also on our businesses. As an example, for the staff, absences can be expected. Okay, even if we say that everyone is we are now free to go back to work, illnesses, incapacity, suspected, actual, or post-infections may happen. Some employees may need to stay at home to care for the ill. Okay, people may feel safer at home, so that because they prefer to keep out of crowded places. Some people may be fulfilling other voluntary roles in the community, and others may need to stay at home to look after school-age children, as schools are still likely to be closed. And from the Department of Education, they're saying that it will only be open sometime in August. So that's going to be, there's going to be an impact. Expect absences of employees. And then for the businesses, we all know this, there are disruption of supplies of materials needed for our ongoing activity. Availability of services, even from contractors, may be impacted, and so forth and so on. Okay. So what are the general actions that typically should be done in dealing with post-ECQ pandemic in the workplace? The first is you plan for it. And I'm sure everyone has already done that. We are already on our second month, I think, since March 12th. So if you haven't done some of the items that I'm going to say, I'm going to outline, then maybe try to reflect and make sure that it's not yet too late. Put it in place so that you're ready. First is you plan for it. So I'm number one is, look at the essential services, the facilities and the plans that you have and other production inputs, knowing what you need. You plan for up to 50% staff absences for periods of 1 to 2 months. Even the government is saying that on a moderate uh, and moderate community ECQ quarantine, uh, only 50% of the workforce are required to come to the office, and then the rest can still, stay back. So how is that? How will that impact your productivity? How will that impact your, the work activities? What are the work that will start, stop, continue? And then assess your people and the skill requirement in order for you to deliver the essential work that is required. So this is an opportunity for the organizations to really look at, how can we work focusing on only on the core essentials. Maybe some of those things that are nice to have may be set aside for the meantime while we're going through this transition period. So the number 4 is very important. How do you what are the plans and what are your policies? So HR would play a huge role in creating policies and procedures to increase social distancing in the workplace, reduction of movement, and so forth and so on. While there are so what are what the while the employees are back in the office, what are the ways to minimize illness? What are those ways on how we can minimize infections while at work, while in the workplace? So let's consider how the essential messages like the basic hygiene and the protocols, pandemic response should be done. So HR should have policies and procedures around that, including PPE. Expect that in the usual or in the normal ways of doing things prior to COVID, there were PPEs required under the OSH, Occupational Safety and Health requirements from the Department of Labor. But given this COVID, how do you now look at facial masks and all that to protect our employees from infection? Will they now be considered as PPE? And so if it's PPE, that will now be an additional cost for the company simply because PPE is mandated to be shouldered by the employer. So purchase additional contingency supplies is also a good, way of managing risk and mitigating risks. So you plan for it and have a very robust, comprehensive plan for the ECQ pandemic. The second one is keep it out. Alert staff to changes in pandemic status. So your communication strategy should now focus on, updates on what are the different changes happening, within the government, within the local, where your presence is, the national, and then even global. So ensure that you have your local and overseas travel restrictions because these were not yet lifted. So ensure that you have a policy on that one so that everyone is clear and everyone looks at the same page in terms of travel, even within the country. Review and test your essential business continuity measures. It's really important that you have your crisis management plan and activate measures to minimize introduction and or spread of COVID-19. You know this, post notices, social distancing, how do you manage employees who got sick, and workplace cleaning. So what are the list? So you can probably have a checklist even in the sanitation of the workplace. Manage it, communicate with staff to promote confidence in the workplace. Make sure that you activate your policies and procedures on how to do contact tracing and activate process for recovered staff members to return to work, assuming that you have employees who have been infected by COVID. How are we going to you know allow them to return to work? And well, quite sensitive, some people have the tendency to bully them, or even you know uh, uh, harass them or stay away from them because of their lack of knowledge about COVID. So, how do you make sure that you know fairness, and in terms of them coming back to work, and without fear of harassment is in place? So HR will really play a huge role in all of this. So policies and procedures need to be put in place, and then of course recover from it. So there are four. Plan for it, keep it out, manage it, and recover. So the next slide would really be about, what are the things that you need to take a look at when you're now about to return to business. Things to consider when companies reopen. Number one, labor compliance. During the forced lockdown, or the ECQ, the government provided us several opportunities or several ways on how to make sure that while everyone is encouraged to stay home, the business community tried to do several ways on how to secure jobs. Okay, and and with that, we were able to embrace different flexible work arrangements, like reduced work hours, temporary suspension or furlough. We also embrace work from home arrangements, part-time, telecommuting, remote working, condensed work week, customized work hours, even job sharing. So after ECQ, all of these work arrangements will be subject to compliance, aligned with the labor law. Why? It was because the rationale is that, during the ECQ, it was not really the forced lockdown, and all of this were not really driven by the company or by the employer, but it's really a function of, the directive of the government. But after ECQ, it is assumed that you go back to business as usual. A lot of companies, I suppose, have been adversely affected by this, not just on the financial aspects, but even on the way the employees are now looking at things after ECQ. So how do we make sure that we recontract our employees should we decide now to embrace different work arrangements? Remember that, in our employee agreement with them, we have certain agreement, or we have certain parameters on the work arrangements that we entered into with each of those individuals. So um, we need legal advice. So it's very important that you are legally advised on how do you recontract your employees using a different work arrangement. More so on those people who were temporarily suspended and those who were on furlough. That was okay before because of the forced lockdown, but it doesn't mean that, after ECQ, they would still be on temporary suspension or furlough. So think about that. Employees on first leaves, temporary layoff, we know has a limit of up to 6 months only. However, some companies might say, okay, I don't need to let them return to work, within the 6 months. So that's okay as long as it is supported by your business data, and in all that, it's supported by the current state of your business. But you have to make sure that you need to balance adverse effect on productivity, employee morale, retention. Employer following sound people principle should observe fairness and organizational justice. And should you decide to let them go, take note in the the substantive and procedural requirements in separating employees, because after a while you really have to take the bitter the painful decision to let go of your employees, given the new work arrangement and given even the new business models that you are embracing. Uh, Also consider identification of employees who are able to report back to work. Um, the company I'm the company that I am with right now, Elana Cosmetics, is really very true to their mission to really take care of their people, and therefore even as early as now, they have already identified, who are those people who are work from home ready, who are connectivity ready, and who are COVID-19 free ready, just considering that some of them may even be residing or living with some people who are high risk in getting COVID. So if you have the natural love and care for the biggest asset of the company, which is people, you think of so many ways on how to prepare them. So the other one is to anticipate employees' requests not to report back to work out of fear of getting infected. This is really very contentious because employees, while employers have the right to assign people in whatever job assignments or whatever job roles they need as a function of, day-to-day business operations. Employees have also an inherent right to refuse to work if they perceive that there is imminent danger or uh, in that exists in the organization. So COVID, even if ECQ is lifted, would still pose imminent danger to some. Some of them, of course, can take risks, but others may not necessarily be as risk takers. And so, if they refuse to work because of this perception, how do you manage their employment status? When do you start saying that, hey, I'm going to look for another job for you that would not allow you to come to work? And when do you now cross the line and say, well, we have already, exhausted all possible means, and because you can't do work from home because you have no connectivity, but at the same time you don't like to come to work, and then there are other options here in the company, but you don't have the skills. So when do you start? When do you stop, cross the line, and say, unfortunately, then you don't have any more fit in the organization, and so this is really about separating as so when do you start doing that? So you need to have a clear guideline and an agreed policy, and it would really be helpful if you cascade that to the organization, so that even the employees know the consequences and what to expect. Okay, this is very important, and I think there is a question here that where I saw, how can we make sure that we track work from home while at the same time balancing the trust? Okay, um, the trust is really important, and I think there is a question here that where I saw, how can we make sure that we track work from home? If we create tracking mechanisms with them, then that would be easier for them. So checking having a clarity on what work needs, what are the work that needs to be done, can be easily tracked through the help of technology. But on the other hand, those who do not have those can create a simple tracking mechanism to put in writing what are those tasks and deliverables on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, so that it's not just about it as, or if you give them the positive benefits of having a discipline of work tracking, then it reduces and so that when there's the point of reckoning, no surprises between the manager and the employee, simply because it was very clear from the get-go that objectives are clear and are tracked. Okay, so one of the supporting mechanisms is the second row, which is the leadership development. People managers are used to coaching and providing feedback on a face-to-face basis. So from home arrangement to retool the people managers on what are the communication protocols during the work from home. How do you manage and how frequent, where, and when do you do checkout meetings, and how do you plan and organize work deliverables? Okay. I have been asking some of the millennials. Obviously, I'm not part of the millennial. I'm a baby boomer. So it's something to think about. Why are different from us? So checkout meetings are short and quick, but at the same time, managers are available anytime. So that's a challenge now. So there's a retooling and reskilling and changing the mindset of the leadership development. And maybe Power and You can help in describe in helping running programs on what are the new skills required for people managers managing work from home arrangements. Of course, VUCA, under this environment, you will see and expect a lot of stressors in the workplace. If in the past, pre-COVID, mental health has already been an issue, not only in the Philippines, but mostly in the first world countries because of the high competition of talent and all that. So consider protocols now that are aligned with sound employment practices on how to handle employees who have mental health issues. Where do we draw the line between taking care of them and genuinely concern about them versus also making sure that you take out the liability of the company on claims that these people have developed this anxiety and stress as a function of their occupation. So create very clear. So again, HR will play a huge role in creating very clear guidelines and policies on how to handle mental health issues. From a business perspective, COVID will change the buying habits of consumers. It actually allowed us to really relook at what do we, as consumers, at what really are the important things that consumers buy. If before there's a different buying habits for consumers, um, right now because of COVID-19, consumers have started to relook at, different avenues, different channels to get the goods. And those agile organizations have already started embracing new ways of reaching out to consumers, delivering their services. And so e-commerce is something that, everyone is already thinking of. Those companies who have already started this are already ahead of the curve. But I can see even some traditional companies are already looking at, online purchases and all that, even, purchasing appliances and all that. So this is something that as an organization, we need to start looking at. And from an HR perspective, if the organization is ready to now embrace a new business operating model to serve customers and consumers, then HR should be ready to translate that into people skills, to translate that into policies around work arrangements, policies in terms of, competency development, and so forth and so on. So there's a lot of work to do, from an HR perspective. Now, lastly, most companies suffered tremendous losses, and so that's why we kept on saying that COVID-19 has impacted adversely uh, the global economy, and we're not spared. So I can imagine that the next step after ECQ is lifted is to, and I think we most companies are already looking at this, you know, create a robust and comprehensive cost reduction program. In my experience, the worst thing that the company can do is to nitpick and just look at, uh, little things and without necessarily having a comprehensive strategy to manage cost. A lot of times, cost is usually attributed to let's reduce manpower. When there are costs that if you look at total business, cost can be attained, or cost reduction can be attained through business reengineering, change the way we do things, maybe even pricing, the conversion cost, productivity, yield, and of course the skills. So maybe do more with less. I am an advocate of that because no, if we continue doing things and saying that we need to have a cost reduction, but at the same time that cost reduction is not anchored on what is our how do we make sure that we provide value to our consumers? Think about that. I remember when I was in a consumer company where this is ice cream. Maybe Selecta can forgive me for giving them that example. Selecta, I think at the time was at the had a low market share compared to Magnolia. So the managing director of Selecta started looking at how best can we provide more value for money compared to our competitors. So without reducing manpower, the strategy was to look at volume rather than pricing, because it's really a strategy for business. What is our value proposition? Is it about pricing strategy or is it a volume strategy? And so he chose volume strategy, and through volume strategy, we tried to look at the cost of goods sold, and that would now mean that was how it was translated to productivity in the workplace, making sure that each yield is higher than the compliance to plan is high, and therefore there is less cost in producing the products, and that's where the company was able to compete with its competitor, and it was able to gain market share. So that is what I'm referring to as a holistic approach to looking at cost reduction, because sometimes just being efficient and effective is really the not just sometimes being efficient and effective is the best way, or is the best approach to manage the bottom line rather than just look at cost reduction. So why has that got to do what has that got to do with HR being exposed to the different departments, being exposed to the different productivity, and an advocate of employees, human capital productivity, should have knowledge, or should be active in looking at how best we can optimize our people and how best can we drive productivity in the workplace. So my parting words. COVID-19 changed our mindset, our social beliefs, and philosophy. It forced us to do things that we never thought can be done, and that is social distancing, as an example. The long battle on climate change has naturally been addressed due to ECQ. The skies are clearer, air is cleaner. Even the riots happening in Hong Kong, nobody thought it's gonna stop, but ECQ stopped it. So I firmly believe that economy will recover, commerce will continue. There have been a lot of adversities and challenges that the world has faced in the past, and as human being, we are, we are strong, and I have uh, I have strong belief that we will be able to recover. But what COVID-19 really taught us is to put people first. I think this is something that, I look at things on a half-filled glass, and despite the adverse effect of COVID, let's look at this from a half-filled glass and see what are the opportunities that we can do because of the new environment. So with that, I really thank you very much, and I look forward to some of your questions.
Thank you very much, Thelma, for that very insightful presentation. If I may, as our participants may be thinking about their questions right now, may I just ask you to perhaps go over some of the things you shared in the previous to the last slide on leadership development. I believe we lost you for a couple of times there.
Oh, okay. Well, I was talking about, on a return to work, it's very critical that we support, people managers. Pardon my French, it's foolish to just, to just expect that managers would know how to handle their people, in a different work arrangement. They were wired and they were trained on how to coach and how to provide feedback on how to manage work activities in a regular workplace. Now that a lot of employers are embracing the work from home arrangement. What are the skills? What are the techniques? Even simple techniques on how to coach and provide feedback to people who have different readiness and who have different motivation on how they can be coached. I am an advocate of situational leadership. Some are ready in terms of their readiness levels. They're new in the job, and therefore you need to provide them this new bag of tricks on directing, as opposed to those people who have been doing all of these things in their work, and therefore they need not have a directing leadership style but a delegating leadership style. That will not go away. But given that you're talking to all of them during the Google Hangout or the Zoom and all that, how do you make sure that you use different leadership styles depending on the motivational and readiness behavior of the readiness level of your people? Some are way advanced and some are already still starting. So how do you manage that in a checkout virtual meeting? So that's quite a challenge. And so you need to, and that's why I said, PowerinU can probably help in training people managers on new ways of coaching and feedback and using different leadership style.
Thank you. Thank you for further expounding on that.
Yeah.
That one question, actually, I'll combine two questions coming from two different senders. Uh, if you would share with us your perspective on how different business sectors, I guess, in the Philippines would be affected by this new normal. I guess
Okay.
the question really will be around who's gonna be in a better position uh, to succeed or recover quickly in this new normal, and who will probably struggle a little bit. I know you touched on that from a supply chain maturity perspective a while ago. One particular question that was typed in was your perspective on the outlook of for the BPO industry. As you know, it's a very big employer, a very big dollar generator for the country.
From as I've said earlier, the ones that will really be affected because of the global economy would still be the manufacturing sector, especially in the automotive and then all those who are highly reliant on supply products that are coming from different countries. So that's one. And then of course, I was just listening to Mr. Razon's interview with CNN, and so entertainment, hospitality business would also be affected simply even gaming. Who would like to travel because of the travel restrictions, and who would like to stay in hotels and do be tourists and all that. So the entertainment, the hospitality business, and the gaming business would surely be adversely impacted until such time that there is a vaccine that is available for everyone. So that's just one example of this. But more, from an overall perspective, and this is really just my view, talking to different people in supply chain, different senior executives in supply chain, senior executives even in the beverage industry, and all that. I think food manufacturing would definitely be able to recover at once, and that includes food and beverage. On the other hand, and that's exactly why people need to understand what exactly are the essential and non-essentials as far as consumers are concerned. And therefore, it is the company's onus to make sure that naman how consumers are behaving. Essential to them can actually be created as a function of how we provide value to the product. So even water that has not been essential before became essential simply because it was how it was presented to the consumers. So the idea of companies now creating that market research in a way, rather than go back to the consumer behavior before. Go back, look at how do you, what do you expect, what do you think, so you do a pre-search. How do you forecast what will be the consumer buying habits and what will be their essentials, and how can you make sure that your products become essential to them post covid post COVID-19. So that's just my perspective on consumer habits and how our products. So it really depends on how you position your products. There would be, but from a different business sectors, all the more. Uh, we need to have a good transition of moving from bricks and mortars to omni-channels. People are starting to look at different ways of reaching out, getting their products, the things that they want to buy. And so even the Philippines, who is a third world country, has already started embracing the different omni channels. And so companies should start thinking about that. Okay. I remember when I was in my previous companies, even outsourcing was a difficult thing to do here in the Philippines, because in other parts of the world, outsourcing is okay simply because people are on a low touch culture, as opposed to Philippines where it's a high touch. You need to see faces, so that outsourcing needs to have, it's very difficult to do it here. But right now, I think we're learning. So the Filipinos are starting to embrace the low touch, starting to trust, even the e-ticketing and all that, queuing using technology. So I think that kind of readiness level on the technology is going to help us relook at our business models.
Thank you. Thank you, Thelma.
Yeah.
Earlier, I'll move to another question. Earlier, you mentioned in your presentation what I think many of us realize, and that is the risk of business closures, business failures. You in fact mentioned perhaps that startups may be one of those areas that may be at great risk. But even if you're not a startup, I think there are companies that are perhaps ill prepared for what happened, as many of us probably are on a personal
Yes.
basis. Um, one question that came up is, how do you, from a personal standpoint, how do you perhaps prepare for that, and if that should come to pass on for us as employees, what can we best do to prepare ourselves to, I guess, make ourselves marketable, available for other opportunities if that opportunity in our current employer is no longer possible at this
Yeah.
time? What should we do or what can we do? What's your advice?
Two things. From the employee side, we need to start looking at, not loyalty, not entitlement and all that. We need to start creating a culture of employability. People should start, our employees should start really thinking about, continuously developing new skills so that they don't look at the company alone, but for them to become employable within and outside their organization. Benji, you and I have been talking about this even maybe 10 years ago, but I think people still did not get that, and so a lot of organizations are still a little bit protective of their employees, and so when they start talking about we will make you employable, they don't really mean it. I think right now that's the value proposition for people for employers to really say, hey, I don't expect you to be here with me for the longest time, but I expect you to be employable and have the right skills while you're still with us. Okay, so that's a change in paradigm, for employers, and the same time for employees to make sure that they continuously develop the skills. On the other hand, for the businesses, I think multinationals have a different way of looking at things. They're like ships. It's so difficult to move it simply because there's a lot of um, alignments and all that, so huge. I fearlessly predict that smaller companies who are more agile and can make decisions right there and then, can will survive in the new ways of doing things. You and I also have that experience, when some companies we know went into chapter 11 simply because of that particular agility, right? They cannot move so fast simply because they were married to their legacies. Okay, and so when the technology came about, they were too late. It was too late for them to bounce back. So I think it sounds cliche, but for business leaders who are in this webinar, you really need to be prepared to kill yourself and get reborn. That's basically
Thank
there
you.
are
Thank
there are things that you really need to have,
you.
be irreverent of the past and embrace new ways of doing things.
Thank you. In fact, if I might just add, Thelma, during this time, a lot of companies in the education, learning and development field, consulting field, have actually opened a lot of the resources practically for free or
Yes.
at very minimal cost. So if you're, not fully utilized, you have a lot of free time at home, and you really want to start equipping yourself for any eventuality, or perhaps you might just want to think of this as an opportunity for a career shift. It's
Hmm.
a good time to actually start learning some new skills. Uh, and as I said, you can acquire a lot of knowledge, new knowledge in areas of interest that you would like to pursue during this time while you have more
Absolutely.
time at home.
That's right.
So,
So
of course, you need to put in the effort and the time.
yes. So, well, just to also add to, some of the questions, very specific how. Maybe this is not the forum because we only have an hour. How the questions on how to do it specifically, implementation, operationalizing everything that we said. Maybe that can be a separate webinar altogether, so that I can also provide you some toolkits, some guidelines, even probably right now, you need to have a comprehensive pandemic response plan. It's as simple as, what do you do? What are those things that you need to, provide, as information to, people to follow, and guidelines. So even the work arrangements, how do you now create that kind of guideline so that people are on the same page? So it's really about, clarifying. It's about communicating. It's about transparency as well.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you, Thelma. I'm afraid we've used up all our time.
Okay.
But thank you very much for sharing with us your insights, very valuable. I'm sure there are a lot of questions. This is a very rich topic and very relevant topic at this point. But I'd like to thank you again for spending time and sharing your knowledge with us. And I hope our participants have also learned a lot from participating in today's webinar.